Well, folks, a very warm welcome to our latest Generation podcast, the podcast where we talk about mission from a Scottish perspective. We always say that it's a mission, that it's a podcast where we don't have celebrities, and that's absolutely true. And today is no exception. I've got here my ex-friend, Mez McConnell, and I'm very pleased to welcome Mez. Good to see you.
Well, it's not very good to see you because I don't really like you very much. So.
Okay, I love you. What's the difference between loving and liking? Do you have to like someone to love them?
I think it helps, right? Particularly if it's your wife. That's always helpful.
Absolutely.
So Jesus says, love your enemies, right? So you don't have to like them to love them.
Okay, so you run a thing called 20 Schemes and also, I think, Church in Hard Places. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, right. I want to talk just about mission stuff, communication, misunderstandings, a lot of stuff. We'll talk for about 35, 40 minutes. Number one, not a lot of people know that you were once a missionary in Brazil, right?
Yes.
So I am really interested to see whether you see a difference in where you are now and where you were in Brazil in terms of missional principles. So what I want to know is, do you have exactly the same approach in Scottish Schemes as you had in Brazil?
That's a good question, actually. I think there are similarities between Scottish favelas and Brazilian favelas and Scottish housing schemes, which most people probably find surprising, given the absolute poverty of a favela compared to the relative richness of a housing scheme. But I mean, in terms of the people, how they think, how they relate to the rest of the world, how they understand God, and how they receive the gospel, there's remarkable similarities. In terms of how I do mission, I don't think I changed that much.
Okay, here's my thing. My thesis is, rightly or wrongly, that I don't think there's any difference to the way you do mission anywhere in the world, whether it's Brazil, Zambia, Buenos Aires, Easter House.
Depends what you mean by the phrase "to do mission."
Yeah, okay.
If you mean to preach the gospel, there's absolutely no difference, is that at all? We preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. If you're talking about, there are still some hurdles to overcome, which are probably going to be cultural in every context. And so you do mission in the sense of understanding a people and a culture differently in that respect, but how you engage with people differs. But yeah, it depends what you mean by doing mission.
Yeah, I mean, in other words, you learn the language, you contextualize, you build bridges, you understand the culture.
Yeah, I agree. The same principles apply everywhere, right?
Excellent.
I think what confuses Scottish people is a Scottish person living in Morningside doesn't quite understand, or let's say a Christian worshipping in Morningside doesn't quite, I don't think, fully appreciate the cultural chasm between them, where they live, and a housing scheme 2 miles down the road. That's what I think the issue is. So you're probably closer to a Brazilian favela than in Niddrie than you are probably to a middle-class church in Morningside.
What would the similarities be? Poverty, sense of community, what else?
Yeah, poverty, sense of community, supernaturalistic worldview. But, I read a lot of stuff, obviously, on church planting and lots of talk about postmodern Europe and, intellectual sort of atheism, etc. Very, very rarely will you find that you won't find it really in South America, seriously, among the poor. And you won't find it in the housing schemes of Scotland, largely. That's a very, very middle class, westernized, richer take on the world. But I think a lot of these guys who do talk about church planting and talk about all sorts of stuff, they miss the poor because I don't think they understand them.
Right. Here's a really good question. I had a conversation with a guy the other day, and folk use this expression, Jesus had a bias towards the poor.
Yeah.
Right. Well, let's talk about that. What do you think? Agree, disagree?
I disagree, and I agree.
Okay, unpack that.
I'm just writing a book on this, by the way, actually now, on the poor in Scotland. Look, we're back to words again, aren't we? What do you mean by the poor? Jesus had a bias to the poor in terms of he left the glories and riches of heaven to come to a crap hole in Israel, and he's born to poor parents and lives a relatively working class lifestyle until he begins his ministry, and in that sense, Jesus' bent was for the poor of the world who were lost. So there's spiritual poverty, and in that sense, Jesus has got a bent towards the spiritually poor. Does he have a bent towards the economically poor? I would say he definitely has a bent towards the poor and the most vulnerable of society, those on the fringes. Definitely, God is very clear about that. Micah 6:8, right? Well, you pick an Old Testament prophet. And you'll see about God requires what? Righteousness and justice. Righteousness and justice. Always justice comes with righteousness. So, but does he favor the poor over the rich? That's where I would hesitate to agree. And I hesitate to agree because that statement, Jesus favors the poor, is very, very tied into liberation theology, which itself originated in South America, right? So,
okay,
I just be careful with words, is all.
Yeah. I mean, would you diss the whole of liberation theology, or like many things has got a point?
I would diss it. I would diss it principally because they interpret the Bible in light of social problems, and their conclusions, therefore, are often very wrong, whereas their points they're trying to make are correct. But if they interpreted the social problems in light of the Bible, you'd find they'd be on far stronger ground. Okay.
Yeah. So you're kind of thinking out loud about this stuff just now, and there may be a book in the next few months, years, yeah?
Book in the next 12 months, hopefully, yeah. We just spent 4 years researching every housing state in the UK.
Good. Excellent.
38,000 of them.
How many?
38,000.
38,000 estates?
Correct.
Wow. In the UK?
Yeah.
That's I was going to say unbelievable, but you said it, so it's eminently believable.
Well, an estate can be anywhere from a group of 2,000 people to 20,000 people.
Yeah.
So
interesting. What I want to talk about now is one of the things that's distinctive of your ministry is gospel ministry. You don't compromise. I've noticed that you're starting in Niddrie a new initiative called Retrain.
Yeah.
Is this a change in emphasis? Are you guys now going all diaconal and mercy ministry and social justice? Tell me the story about Retrain, and where does this fit in your wider philosophy?
So our philosophy is basically this: the best mercy ministry is a healthy local church. Simple as that. And so what we've discovered, as we've write 10 works now across 5 cities, and we're about to launch another 3 churches in Glasgow in the next 6 months. And so what we've noticed is as people are being converted, largely, or large numbers of them, not all, who have been converted have never finished high school, what we would call being long-term unemployed or never really held down jobs. And so we've run into what we call discipleship crisis. So we're discipling people, and one of the ways in which we're discipling people is when they're saved, God has saved them to serve. He has not saved them to continue living the lifestyle they live, blagging off the dole and, you know what I mean, messing about. If a man doesn't work, he shouldn't eat. And so one of the things we said is you've got to work. And so what we run something called Ragged School Theology, which I'm sure you know about. and we disciple and train people with, and that has two strands, the Ragged School. We're training and trying to train and develop the next generation of women workers and gospel workers and planters for housing estates in Scotland. But secondly, we realize that the majority of people who come through our discipleship will have to go back into the workplace and find some sort of job, largely low skilled given their lack of qualifications. And so we wanted to provide a means by which we can continue discipling and preparing people by offering employment to them, helping them start up new businesses, and equipping them to be Christians in the workplace. So it fits into it's not a shift toward mercy. It's, you can call it that if you like, but I understand that's not, when people say that, they're not meaning that to denigrate the ministry. What we're saying is it's just a expansion of our discipleship. And so, so we're aiming to start. And these are very small businesses. We've just bought a cafe in Trinent, and the people we're employing there have all been saved out of addictions or prison. We are helping a young single mother with a cleaning business. So we're starting, we're removal companies. These are low skilled employment opportunities that we're offering, but it's meaningful work that brings honor to God as they do it for the glory of the Lord. So that's how we see it.
Right, and the stuff like the cafe and the removal business, how would you help? Would you give funding? Would you give loans?
So we raise about $250,000 capital fund, and we've got the backing of a Christian businessman who has provided us with free, he's paid for it, but free to us, legal advice to set this up as a Christian charity. Again, it's a part of the ministry of Niddrie Community Church under the direction of its elders. So everything is, if you like, it's a ministry of the church. It's not a ministry separate to the church, which is not how mercy ministries usually act. And we will, people will get training. If they want to, let's say they want to apply for a job, they go through the usual means. If they want to apply to set up a small business or do something, then they just apply to us. We interview them. We offer them training in the basics, starting up a small business, invoicing, accounts, money. We help them. We give them all the financial structure, even supply them with an accountant, and then over a 3 to 5 year period, just sort of nurse them through the initial stages. And so,
right. It sounds a lot like, I'm sure you've read, is it Brian Fickert's book, When Helping Hearts?
Oh, yeah.
This sounds really aligned with that kind of philosophy, which is kind of countercultural, isn't it? It's really difficult because our instinct is to give money. So, what's your take on When Helping Hearts?
Yeah. So Brian Fickert wrote the foreword for my book, Church in Hard Places. So I know Brian. We have a few differences. He would be less. I'm very firm on mercy ministry should be, the local church should be at the heart of everything, where he'd be more independent organizations. We're more aligned actually to a guy called Bob Lupton, who's in Atlanta. Have you ever read anything by him?
No, I have not. Tell me about him.
Bob Lupton, you should Google him. And he works in really, really rough downtown Atlanta and has set up a lot of projects, bought houses in the community, set up small businesses. He believes, like we do, 20 schemes, that mercy ministry as is done in the Western countries and particularly in the UK is just wrong, and that we shouldn't just be giving people things away for free. We should be looking at ways in which we can help people in a crisis. But if we continue to just keep people in crisis mode, they'll never grow for themselves. And so, we follow quite a lot of his principles. So we're about, we want to help people at the moment of deepest need, but we don't want to keep them in it by giving them stuff. We want to say, look, if God has saved you, he saved you for a purpose. And regardless of whether that purpose is cleaning the toilets or running your own business, you need to be doing it for the glory of the Lord. So that's what we're about.
Right. So is that one of the reasons why you guys don't do food banks? It's not particularly high up in your agenda.
Yeah. We do food banks. We just don't do food banks the way food banks are done in a normal middle-class church.
Okay. Right. That sounds interesting. What's the difference between the way you do them and the way...
Most food banks, people go in, blah, blah, blah. How are you? Whatever. Here's a bag of food. Maybe you have a chat. Off you go. We just started operating a new system. So let me explain the difference. So in the pandemic, when the community was locked down, one of the biggest groups to suffer in our community were children. And it was children who had been going into the schools early in the morning and been able to get a breakfast because they weren't being fed at home. Once the school shut down, kids were hungry. And so we gave out, at the height of the pandemic, I think we were giving out about 600 food parcels a week in our community, 3 meals a day, etc., for the families of a lot of these children. So we were giving that away, no problems. That's relief, right? There's a situation. Once the doors open and things continued, we withdrew that relief, but we've got like a thing that happens in our Niddrie cafe twice a week. It looks like a food bank and smells like a food bank, but it's not a food bank. So we have a deal with like Marks and Spencer's and a couple of other supermarkets nearby who give us free stuff, and then we sell it on like super knockdown prices. But the point is that people are paying for it. Now, if someone comes in and they're in desperate, dire need, and it's our first meeting with them, we'll obviously bag them up something and help them out. But we won't continue to do that because that just perpetuates what we think is bad and unhelpful habits. And so we do these things, but we do them as a first point of crisis relief. We don't recommend, as some churches do, that we're giving the same people handouts week after week, month after month, year after year.
Right. Let me talk about something else. Paradoxes, complications, lack of simplicity. Life is not simple. So just as, we're talking about the bias to the poor, you says, yeah, maybe he's I, maybe he's not. In the same breath, church and parachurch, okay?
Yeah.
You are a big church guy. That's your thing. Church.
But can I just be clear? So was Jesus. He sort of died for the church, just to, He was a big church guy too.
Okay. So you and Jesus.
Yeah. Mark Dever didn't invent the local church.
Yeah. So you and Jesus are big church guys.
Yeah,
right?
we're good on that.
Okay. Now maybe Jesus was perhaps not a big parachurch guy, and yet you're also involved in parachurch. Tell me what the thinking is between the two.
Well, I'm not involved in parachurch really. 20schemes is a ministry, the church planting ministry of Niddrie Community Church. Everybody gets this wrong. They always think it's a separate entity to the church that we started up. No, we haven't. It's a ministry of the church, overseen by the church elders and accountable to the congregation, because obviously we're Baptist Congregationalists, right? And so we have some relationships with certain parachurch organizations, which I think are necessary and helpful. Other parachurch institutions we avoid because I don't think they're helpful at all.
Okay, so it's a ministry. I like this. It's a ministry of Niddrie Community Church.
Yes.
But you have a network with all these other churches, like in Bingham, like in Gracemount, yeah?
Like your Presbyterian boys.
I don't know if you play chess, but you see where I'm going here. So
I've had it all over the years. I know where the questions are leading. Let's go.
So you've established a presbytery there. That's a great move, Mez. That's a really
I haven't established a presbytery, and I'll tell you how I haven't established a presbytery. Because we're a loose affiliation. So the 20 Schemes guys aren't 20 Schemes churches. They're just, so your Presbyterian guys, right? We have no control, authority, or say over how and what they do on the ground. We help them to raise money, help them to get interns and people. They're accountable to and this is also, in all seriousness, the Presbyterians are not Baptists, and also we don't interfere in that sense, and so they're affiliated to us through friendship more than any power relationship. With being a Baptist Congregationalist, the churches in Bingham or Gracemount or Dundee or wherever, the ones that are established, they're independent churches with their own elders and leadership. And again, I have no say. I don't speak in their churches. I don't have any authority over their lives. They can ring me, they can ask for advice, I raise money for them, etc. And so in that sense, it's probably looser than people think, because people often said, well, you're Presbyterian. And in a way, I actually like Presbyterianism because I think they got some things right, but I'm not in the sense that I have any, if a moral issue was to happen with one of the leaders of our churches, I don't have any authority to come in and take control of the situation. Unless the individual concerned is an employee of 20 Schemes. So often we'll employ interns, we pay them, but we send them out.
Okay. I'm seriously not making a party political point here, but would you agree that there's no such thing as a pure independent church, as in me and my small corner and you and yours? Just as in the same way, I'd say that a healthy Presbyterian church has got to have a degree of independence.
I would say, and I would agree with Presbyterianism here, I would say that there is, my position would be independent but interdependent. And
I like that.
And that's how I would see our relationship as Niddrie with the rest of the guys. And we try not to be party. I'm a Baptist. I want to plant Baptist churches, right? But I want to help independent evangelicals, brethren, Presbyterians, gospel men and women will support it. We had a Baptist guy just gave one of your guys $100,000. Did you know that?
Yeah, I know that.
Well, not that he gave it. I would have told him to give it to someone else. I wouldn't really. But and so again, what happened? That money came in. The guy gave it to us. We gave it to your guy, and we stepped back. How he spends that, there's no authority there. It's just praise the Lord, be blessed.
Yeah.
Let us know how you get on. So so I think I think we're independent but interdependent.
That's great. Whereas we are interdependent but independent. So
yeah.
Let me talk a little bit about tribalism in Scotland. This has really concerned me because I am, one of my besetting sins is that I'm quite tribal, and it's really bad, and I need to deal with it. I'm seeing that in Scotland. There's a lot of tribalism. There's a lot of egos in the room. There's a lot of just differences. Is that a fact? How can we break that down? And paradoxically, how can we run with it? Because it's good that we're different.
Mm-hmm. Look, tribalism isn't a Scottish only sin, is it? Generally, UK Reformed evangelicals, particularly, are very tribal. We for some unknown reason, and I still don't know why, but we seem to have crossed a lot of these tribes. It's interesting. My last book, which I wrote on child abuse, and we had guys who were super right wing, particular Baptists and Presbyterians down the other end, and some charismatic dudes and everybody in between. So it's fascinating that we seem to have crossed some of it. We haven't done it on purpose. We just try to keep the gospel center to the whole thing. I haven't got any answers to tribalism. I've been in Scotland. This is my 14th year, and most of my friends are Presbyterian dudes. I run with those boys. They're my pals. So, I'm not quite sure how to answer that question. So.
Okay. Again, interesting, but how's the work going? Church in hard places. The clue is in the name.
So church in hard places. Here's what happened. I started 20 schemes 7 years ago through much Scottish indifference. You lot are miserable, by the way. That is a real cultural point, by the way. You go to Scotland, they're like, yeah, brother, how can we help you? You go to Scotland and they're like, that'll never work. Useless. We started it 7 years ago. And then what I found was we had a growing audience. We're quite young, and so we've got quite a good sort of multimedia online presence. Hundreds of thousands of followers. And we were getting emails from people in Australia, China, even South America, saying, will you come to our country and do 20 schemes here? And my response was, no, I won't. 20 schemes is definitively, singularly focused on Scotland. I have no interest in anything but Scottish housing estates. We're about gospel churches for Scotland's poorest. That's it. And then I was approached by a couple of people, Acts 29, who said, look, we suck at this. We suck at reaching the poor. We're just planting in university, the usual stuff, universities, business areas, people with money. Is there something you can help us with? And then, we thought about it over a lot of years. I didn't want to be distracted from Scotland. And so I sort of began the Church in Hard Places initiative, which is basically helping Acts 29 to finance, train, and help young church planters in the poorest communities around the world to get some theological training, because most are poorly taught, if not taught at all, and to be able to join a network of churches who had money, who would be able to encourage them financially. And so we started off with like eight men about 4 years ago. I think we're currently training 400 men in 30 something countries. So that's doing really well. I basically 1 or 2 days a week of my time is taken up with that. Sometimes I'll go and speak at a place, but we've generally trained a leader in each of those countries, and those leaders are now multiplying. So, okay. That's just to keep my focus was, I want to keep 20 schemes Scotland.
Yeah, I think it's. I often say, and my friends, at least my one friend that I've got left, laughs and says,
is he like you?
We don't do England, We don't do England. And that's not, I like English folk. You've got a bit of English in you.
No English in me. There's no English in me. Don't do that.
An English mindset. You've been living down there.
Not a chance. Yeah. No chance. Yeah. Now I really don't like you. Now we're taking a dark turn.
Oh, you're in denial here. You're in denial.
Got an English wife.
An interesting question. The point there is, it's good to focus. Focus is good, and that's one of the things that you've definitely got. I want to ask a question. It's about guys who in the ministry of the word, and I suppose girls in other ministries. Do you have to be a working class scheme guy to work in the schemes, or can so-called posh people work in the schemes?
No, you don't have to be. Good.
So, what do you need? I guess a love for people. Is there, could someone with a Boris Johnson accent minister in a scheme?
Yeah. What was Paul?
He was a posh boy, rich posh boy.
He was a Jew of Jews, massively highly educated. Ends up having a massive ministry to largely uneducated slaves and Gentiles. So the cultural jumps can be made when the Spirit of the Lord is upon you, right? If the Lord has called you to, but my issue has never been with middle-class people being unable to relate to us. My issue is they don't want to. They're ignoring the schemes. They're scared of the schemes. They're living a lifestyle, generally middle-class Christians, of let's get Felicity, have a little baby Felicity, we'll have a little nice house, we'll move to a bigger house, we'll make sure she gets a university education. And they're always about moving up and moving on. And they're leaving behind a whole 45% of the Scottish population lives in housing schemes. And my point has never been you can't reach them. My point is, why are you not reaching them? It is a crime.
Yeah. Good point. Apologies to anyone out there with a daughter called Felicity, but if
I've got friends with a daughter called Felicity.
I'm just thinking that if you do have a daughter called Felicity, and if you are considering ministry in the scheme, well, this is
you won't make it. You won't make it if your daughter's called Felicity.
No, this is pretty much direct revelation that you've got to go and do it. I was going to say something there that was really interesting. I was going to ask a question. I was going to turn the whole ministry, but it's gone out of my mind totally. I mean, one of the many things that impresses me about you is that you've got reach. You've got intellectual reach. You can go up, you can go down intellectually. I think you could probably have a conversation with Sinclair B. Ferguson. I think you could also have a conversation with wee Malky, who's in Methadone.
So what we're saying is Sinclair being the low down dude, wee Malky being the intellectual, yeah? Okay.
It could be that way. I mean,
I've done a gig with Sinclair.
So you can talk to SBF, you can talk to wee Malky. Is that something that just come, or is it something that you developed?
Well, I grew up on the schemes, and I didn't grow up in working class family. I grew up at the bottom level, the bottom feeders. The guys who never work, don't want to work, suffered whatever. That's irrelevant. But I grew up there. Then when I got converted, the entire culture of the church is middle class. And so if I'm one thing, I'm adaptable. And very quickly, I learned these are different people here. Yeah. They talk differently. They live differently. They view the world differently. And so it was, in some ways, assimilate and survive, or don't. And on your way. And so I've learned, I married a nice middle-class girl. There's lots of good things about people. Everybody thinks I hate middle-class people, and I don't. There's loads of good things, more good things than bad things. I learned to. I was quite intelligent. Anyway, I read books. And when I got my degrees, I had to go to middle-class institutions to get them taught by middle-class people how to understand the Bible and apply it in a middle-class way. And so I learned that through the majority culture of the church. But then, ironically, when I got through all that, having to unlearn it, and go back to my roots again, because I almost fell into the trap that lots of guys do when they escape schemes of, I'm never going back. I'm going to a middle-class church. I'll stay there, earn, decent money, raise a family. But
yeah, because I guess you are culturally bilingual.
Yeah, and I think going to Brazil helped a lot. I always say to guys, I wish. I think our training institution should send people into cross-cultural situations. I've tried this before. It's not got off the ground yet, where I've said to guys like Neil in Morningside and that we've talked about this. Like, why don't you send me one of your, middle-class guys who are an interns, send them over to me for 3 months, and I'll send you one of my guys because they'll be a fish out of water. And actually, even through the struggles, I think both people would grow, and be able to
I
adapt.
absolutely agree. I just remembered what I was going to ask you about. Now, folk talk about schemes, and it's so broad, it's almost meaningless, because there's schemes and there's schemes.
Yeah.
I mean, I was raised in a scheme, but it was a very different scheme to the scheme that you were raised in. The point being, even in schemes, not everybody is unemployed. Not everybody has got addiction problems.
No.
It's a bit like Africa, constantly stigmatizing. It's a bit like schemes. I mean, there's guys in the scheme and girls who are earning as much money as a teacher. So
this is the point I make in the book. Actually, I break down who lives on schemes. One of the chapters is who lives on schemes, and how do these different individuals view the world. And so, so many. I mean, your traditional what I call the old school working class guard, real working class, the old miners. Back in the day, in the 60s and 70s, these guys are now retired and dying out. Those guys are avid readers, super intelligent dudes who, have got a finger on the pulse and a super bright and a very different to what is called the modern working class. The plumber, the jobbing builder, etc., who don't really read books, don't really have a political interest in anything, and see the world in a whole different way. To the immigrant, to the middle class guy family who've just moved in because it's been gentrified, to the drug dealer, to the local entrepreneur who actually makes more money than everybody, to the guy, the young single mom working 3 jobs to keep her kids right, to the feckless drug addicts, to all the way. And so, there's 7-8 different classes, if you like, of people.
What annoys me is that everybody assumes that schemes ministry is to the feckless drug addict.
Yeah.
They forget that on the street there might be a plumber, there might be a joiner, there might be guys in 30, 40k a year who are earning as much as a teacher.
Yeah.
So,
and poverty is not about money. It's another point I make in the book. It's got really very little to do with money.
Right. I'm going to buy this book.
Oh, good.
I'm going to buy this book.
You'll be offended like everybody else.
I've got all your books. I admire your work, as they say. Just one. So a church is not inconceivable that a church in a scheme could be financially independent.
Yeah.
Would you say most of them could be, or some of them could be?
I'd say most of them could be. And I would also add the caveat that there's no biblical imperative that you have to be.
Okay. What are the pros and what are the cons of being financially self-sufficient?
The pros are, it's dead good. The cons are of not being or of being. What are the cons of being financially self-sufficient, are you saying to me?
Yeah.
I don't think there's very many cons of being financially self-sufficient. Here's what I say to my guys. Listen, some of their planters, Niddrie's financially self-sufficient, okay? And I think a couple of the other ones are. But those that aren't are under no pressure to become so, because, the schemes, a Glasgow scheme is massively different than an Edinburgh one. And in many ways, the Glasgow schemes are the poorest. Mm-hmm. And so we don't, part of what I do for my people, as you know, is, I'm an international beggar. Mm-hmm. That's what I do. I beg money to get finances to our men and women so they can get on with ministry. And I don't see, you can say, the cons are, well, you're keeping churches financially dependent on outside sources, etc., etc., etc. I don't really see that as a con in the Bible. We're financially dependent on God's people. How is that a con? Whether they come from, Wester Hales or whether they come from West Africa, it's the Lord's money. The Lord owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, and He is ensuring all we are doing is funneling it to the right places. There was a funny little quip about, I think it was D.L. Moody. It was said about D.L. Moody that tens of millions of dollars passed through his hands and none of it stuck to them. And that's how I feel about 20 schemes. I'll get, that 100K for your guys. I'll get that. Well, just keep it. So, I know there's all sorts of, my first degree is in missiology. I understand the whole concept behind financial independency, etc. But I'm convinced it's almost a middle class, or at least a construct from sort of richer Western mindsets. We've got to be independent. We've got to have this, and I'm just not convinced by it.
Yeah, I think it is complex. I mean, I'm somewhat ambivalent in that our stuff that we do in Africa, stuff that we do in Latin America, we're saying to these churches, listen, guys, we're not the colonialists. We're not a bank. You've got to take responsibility. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, like I'm also an international beggar. Mm-hmm. We receive very generous help, especially from the USA. So that's been double-minded.
But my question is, why aren't you the bank? Why? Why can't you be the bank?
I don't think there's a problem in being the bank if there's a good if there's an honest relationship with the client. If the client sees our church as a charity, that's very, very different. But if it's a bank in terms of it wants capital to grow, I think that's fine. But if it doesn't do any work of its own, I don't think any bank would put up with that. No,
and that goes back to my principle of mercy ministry. Can't just give freebies.
Yeah.
But it is complex in some ways. I think it's simple in others. It's the age-old story that often Western missionaries will say, we've got to get these guys financially independent as quickly as possible and away from us. But sometimes it just isn't easy as that. Other times I've had a conversation with people saying, well, we can't just be giving our money into poor scenarios because we don't know how people are using it. Are they using it well? Are they not using it well? And they're all legitimate questions. I do find it slightly ironic when a guy from an American church with 3,000 members who's just blown $30,000 on bringing his youth group over to see some poor people, then starts becoming super tight when he's asked to donate $300 a month to help a poor pastor in South America. So there's, you have to take my situation with that is the principle is, I think it's a decent principle, financial independency, but I don't think it's a principle we need to cripple our people with, and therefore we take each person on their merit.
Good issue. Our time is coming to an end, Mez. I could talk for hours with you, and hopefully
I feel like I like you more now than when we started.
Yeah, well, I'm a likable guy. I mean, we're both similar in that we both look miserable, but we're probably quite happy people under it.
No, I'm miserable.
No. There's a glint of joy occasionally rises to the surface once every few hours.
Well, there was a glint of joy yesterday when I saw that second Czechoslovakian goal. There was a glint of joy then.
Mez McConnell.
There was, just to be clear to everybody, there wasn't. I support Scotland, not England. Thank you.
Generation dudes, thank you. And dudes, I'm talking like Mez now. I'm sounding so phony. Guys, it is really good. Thank you for joining us. And we hope that you will join in the Next Generation podcast. We hope that we'll have Mez back again. It's taken 3 attempts to get him here. He's a busy man. I had to pay a lot of money to his agents, but we got here. And I'm interested in that new book. When it comes out, we'll get him back. We'll talk about that. Thanks for the book you did on abuse. really useful. A lot of folk will find that helpful. Hard Places book, great book, your own biography, autobiography. Thank you.